Thank you for that introduction. I am delighted to be part of these Holy Night presentations. Some of what I plan to bring in this talk has already been mentioned, in particular by Adriana Coulias. If you missed her talk, I highly recommend watching the recording of her talk. So I have modified my talk a bit to include some different material than what I had originally planned. There will be 5 main points I plan to cover. First, the story of Hiram Abiff is the story of the architect, the builder, the mason. With this, we will survey the evolution of architecture as it applies to the construction of temples. The Gertianum was not the first temple to be burned. We'll look at how fire has been used and why. We will try to answer the question, how should the temple of the future be built? I'll close with some of my own speculations. The stars once spoke to man. It is world destiny that they are silent now. To be aware of the silence can become pain for earthly man. But in the deepening silence, there grows and ripens what man speaks to the stars. To be aware of the speaking can become strength for spirit man. This verse expresses well the evolution of temple building. Let's see why. Temples were erected to enshrine what we have held most sacred. In ancient times, human beings had at their disposal means of help, which are no longer available in our epoch. The gods let their forces stream into the unconscious or subconscious life of the soul. And in a certain sense, it is an illusion to believe that in our brains or souls of the men who built the pyramids of Egypt, the temples of Greece, and the other great monuments, that human thoughts alone were responsible for the impulses expressed in the forms, in the colors, and so forth. For in those times, the gods themselves were working through the hands, the heads, and the hearts of men. What does it take to be an architect? Vitruvius Pollio addressed this question in his The 10 Books on Architecture. This was published in 25 BCE. He wrote, "Let him," that is the architect, "be educated, skillful with the pencil, instructed in geometry, know much history, have followed the philosophers with attention, understand music, and have some knowledge of medicine, know the opinions of jurists, and be acquainted with astronomy and the theory of the heavens." Do you know anyone like that? According to Rudolf Steiner, the temples of the ancient Persian age and their original form can only be dimly pictured or reconstructed from the Akashic Chronicle. Everything back then depended upon the facade, upon the impression made by the frontage of the temple upon those who approached its portals. A man who made his way through this facade into the interior of the temple would have felt the facade spoke to me in a secret, mysterious language. In the interior of the temple, I find everything that was striving to express itself in the facade, end quote. This speaking to me was an important intention of early temple building. The Sphinx and the pyramids are riddles. Why riddles? A world without riddles would be an inanimate world. The world with riddles is a world with life. While the pyramids are dated to 3000 BCE, the Sphinx has been dated to 4000 or even 7000 BCE. The upward rising form of the pyramid, in which there is scarcely an aperture, seems to enshrine a mystery. Within was the innermost sanctuary, where the hearts and souls of men were led to the God who dwelt in deep concealment within the temple. Such buildings enshrined the most sacred mystery, that is, the mystery of the God. The pyramids are shrines. They shut off from the outer world the holiest secret of humanity, namely initiation. These temples shut themselves off from the Ahrimanic outer world. The pyramid was also used in building the Mayan temples of Mexico. This pyramid was built in the 5th century, but there were earlier ones. Just last week, satellite images revealed a 2,000-year-old Mayan city in Guatemala. At the turning point of time, as the mystery of Golgotha was taking place here in Mexico, another supreme mystery occurred where Huitzilopochtli brought the world's greatest Black magician to death, also by crucifixion. This Black magician was taught how to gain power through human sacrifices, where originally the victim's stomach was torn out by hand by the temple priest atop such a pyramid. The Greek god dwelt within the temple. While a dwelling place of the divine spiritual, such a building with its columns, which in themselves reveal their function as bearers capable of supporting what lies upon them, the god is enshrined in something that is whole and perfect in itself. An infinitude is here embodied within earth existence, a harmony of earth and heaven. The Greek temple is, in itself, one complete dynamic whole. Because of its dimensions and harmony, the God is present, whether any human is within or even nearby. Interestingly, this temple was begun about 1 AD and opened in 32 AD. It was built for the god Baal, or Baal, whose symbol was the ram, and whose son would then be the Lamb of God. He was the god of wind, and the word wind means spirit in Greek, and the word Yahweh means the blowing one. Some say Baal was also the god of fertility, of seasons, and of storms. Here we begin to see the temple as a place where the god and humans communed. This temple and other pagan temples were closed during the persecution of pagans in the late Roman Empire, that is from 385 to 388 AD. Then during the rest of the 4th and the 5th centuries, mobs with protection from the Roman army destroyed pagan mystery centers and temples. The ruins at Palmyra that you see here were considered among the best preserved until they were further destroyed by the Islamic State in August 2015. Its city, Palmyra, existed as early as 2000 BCE and was considered glorious with its 1.1 kilometer long main street with columns on each side and perhaps a wooden roof. Why have I shown a theater? Because the first Goetheanum was also a theater for the mystery dramas. Notice the form with the 3 entrances, west, south, and north. We'll compare this to the Goetheanum a bit later. Of great importance for us is the temple legend. It starts about 1000 BCE when a shepherd boy becomes king of Israel. A shepherd boy. Among King David's offspring, two play prominent roles. Firstly, son Nathan becomes a priest, carrying on the lineage that extended back to Seth, who was the replacement son for Abel. Secondly, son Solomon becomes king after David. It fell to Solomon to build this temple. Via a dream, he received the concept, that is, the blueprint, you might say, for the temple, but he and the Israelites had no proper skills with which to build it. Solomon makes requests, and the request to Hiram is answered. King of Tyre, King Hiram, sends their master builder, Hiram Abiff, with a crew, tools, and materials. So Hiram Abiff becomes the chief architect and builder of King Solomon's temple. 1 Kings chapter 7 tells us that Hiram Abiff was the son of a widow. Interestingly, Mani was also a son of a widow. Monotheism was a major branch of Christianity from the 3rd century until the 13th century. 1,000 years. Steiner spoke of the importance of monotheism and how its future role would be the redemption of Ahriman. The Kabbalah views the design of the Temple of Solomon as representing the metaphysical world upon the physical. So the 3 levels, the outer, inner, and priest courts, represent, they claim, the 3 lower worlds of Kabbalah. What Gnosis contained in the form of wisdom, Solomon's temple contained in the form of symbolism. Cosmic secrets were presented in the temple in symbols and pictures. And it was intended that those who entered the temple would receive something through which they could become truly man. The purpose of the Temple of Solomon was to inculcate the meaning of worlds into the souls of those who were permitted to enter it. What the temple revealed was something that the earth as such did not reveal, namely all the cosmic secrets that ray into the earth from the cosmic expanse. The eye of earth looked up to the heavens, beholding the stars. The spiritual eyes of those who were guiding souls from cosmic worlds to the earth gazed downwards and beheld the Temple of Solomon with its symbols. The temple was like a star whose light enabled the temple initiate priests to guide these souls into bodies which would be capable of understanding its meaning. It was the central star of the earth, shining out with special brightness into the spiritual heights. Perhaps we hear in this the grounds for a future eugenic occultism that must take its place alongside a future hygienic and a future mechanical occultism. Note the upper court with its altar upon the 3rd level, and where there was also the molten sea and the pillars of Jachin and Boaz. In the rear of the temple was a curtain that hid the Holy of the Holies, wherein initiations took place. One had to pass between these pillars of Jachin and Boaz in order to enter the temple. Jachin means the divine poured out over the world is in you. Jachin represented the transition from the spiritual to the body, while Boaz represented the transition from body to spirit. So Boaz means what I have hitherto sought within myself, namely strength, I shall find poured out over the whole world. In it I shall live. Harmony of these is what was sought when one entered the temple between these two pillars. There was human drama around building this temple. We heard that Solomon called upon Hiram, the descendant of Cain, to be his master builder. When the construction was underway, Balkis, the queen of Sheba, came to visit Jerusalem because she had heard of the wisdom of Solomon. On her way, the image on the left, she came to a bridge built with the wood discarded from the use for building the temple. Balkis recognized it as the wood that would be used for the cross that would bear the Christ. When she first arrived, she was certainly impressed and charmed by the exalted and clear wisdom and beauty of the king. When he sought to make love to her, she consented to be his bride. Later, she desired to make the acquaintance of the temple's master builder, Hiram. When she first met him, she was captivated merely by his glance. That glance from Hiram Abiff worked in her like fire. In modern parlance, we would say she became a girl on fire for Hiram. As a result, a mood of jealousy arose in Solomon. This became a wish to do something against Hiram, but he was dependent upon him for the completion of the temple. When the temple was almost complete, that is, only one thing was still lacking, which was to have been Hiram's masterpiece. That was the molten sea. It was to represent the ocean cast in bronze. All the necessary mixtures of ores had been prepared by Hiram in a most wonderful manner, ready to be cast. Now, however, 3 apprentices, whom Hiram had found so lacking in skill that he had been unable to promote them to become masters, so they swore to be revenged. They plotted to prevent the successful casting of the molten sea. A friend learned about these plans. He confided them to Solomon, expecting that the king would prevent the realization of this plot. But Solomon, through jealousy, did nothing to stop them because he wished that this failure would destroy Hiram. Indeed, Hiram had to look on while the whole casting disintegrated due to the addition of a wrong ingredient in the mixture by the 3 apprentices. He tried to quench the bursting flames by pouring water over them, but this only made matters worse. Just as he was on the point of despair, Tubal-Cain, his ancestor, appeared to him and told him that he should not hesitate to cast himself into the fire, as he was invulnerable to the flames. Hiram did as he was advised and was subsequently led by Tubal-Cain to the center of the earth. There he met Cain, who resided there in a condition of pristine divinity. Hiram was thus initiated into the mystery of fire and into the secrets of bronze casting. He received from them a hammer and a golden triangle. Then he returned and was able to complete the casting of the molten sea and to put everything in order again. After the casting disaster, Balkis and her handmaid were walking when a bird appeared. It showed them the mystical Tau sign that Hiram had used to gather his workforce. From this, the queen's handmaid and initiate realized that the wisdom of the future was hidden under this sign of the Tau. She told Bacchus she should marry Hiram. That evening, there was a feast at which Solomon became intoxicated. The queen took the betrothal ring back from his hand. She then ran to meet Hiram Abiff and consented to become his bride. But the next morning, Hiram was set upon by the three apprentices. Hiram managed to throw the golden triangle into a well. As no one knew where he had disappeared, a search was made. Even Solomon was afraid and was anxious to find out what had happened. At last, Hiram was found and was able to utter a few last words. He said, "Tubal Cain had promised me that I shall have a son who will be the father of many descendants that will people the earth and bring my work, that is, the building of temples, to completion, to completion." Then he pointed to the well where the golden triangle was to be found. This was then collected and preserved in the Holy of Holies. They are only to be discovered by those who can understand the meaning of the legend of the Temple of Solomon and its master builder, Hiram. Hiram is the representative of the initiates among the sons of Cain, belonging to the fourth and fifth cultural ages. The Queen of Sheba is the soul of humanity. Every female character in these legends denotes the soul in esoteric terminology. She has to choose between Solomon's detached piety, which does not concern itself with worldly conquest, and with the wisdom which is achieved through the overcoming of earthly passions and desires. She is the representative of the human soul, taking a position to begin the fourth cultural age with Solomon, but then uniting herself with Hiram later in the fourth and continuing this through the fifth cultural age. Behind the story of Solomon and Hiram stands the story of Cain and Abel. One kind of Elohim did not remain static with the union of old moon, of wisdom and fire. They went further, and during the creation of man, they were no longer filled with desires, and so they were able to endow their creation with calm and clear wisdom. That is the essential Yahweh religion, the wisdom of which is quite without personal desire. The other, less advanced Elohim, those in whom their wisdom could combine with the fire of the Lemurian epic, when Old Moon was being recapitulated, they created, through Eve, the sons of Cain. These two types exist within all races of mankind and in all periods of history since Lemuria. Out of the desire life of the sons of Cain, all arts and all sciences originate. Out of the Seth Abel stream, all detached piety and wisdom, lacking enthusiasm, has its origin. The sons of Cain become the kings, while the shepherds of Abel become the priests, or should I say the priestesses, for what was carried by this Abel stream manifests in the feminine, while the Cain stream manifests as the masculine. With the founding of Christianity, the Abel piety, passionless and detached, could now merge with the element of love itself. Since then, a higher kind of piety is being prepared. This new kind of piety must develop enthusiasm. This will be the new Christian piety. This piety stream is not yet able to unite with the sons of Cain, however. They will remain adversaries for a bit longer. It is necessary that the sons of Cain are active throughout the whole of the fifth post-Atlantean cultural age. And they are active via their initiates who build the temples for all mankind, constructed out of worldly art and worldly science. Of note here, Christian Rosenkreuz, in his incarnation in the 18th century, was revealed as the guardian of the innermost secrets of the molten sea and the golden triangle. This temple story occurs at the close of the sentient soul age around 950 BC. Just as Noah's Ark was the dimensions of post-Atlantean man, Solomon's temple was the archetype of mankind's future form, for Yahweh is the God of form. King Solomon, a descendant of Abel Seth, was handsome and wise. Hiram Abiff, a descendant of Cain, had inner fire, wise with organizational skills, an exemplary mason. Christian Rosenkreuz, the guardian of the secrets of the molten sea, and Queen of Sheba as the human soul, fill out this temple legend. This story describes the transition from calm devotion and its past glory to fire for the future. Now, Solomon's temple was destroyed in 587 BCE by the Babylonians who enslaved the Israelites. What you see here is a modern model of what the Second Temple would have looked like as finished by Herod I. The first temple by Solomon was destroyed in 587 BCE, as just mentioned. In 538 BC, Babylon fell to the Persians. Cyrus the Great decreed that the Jews could return to Yahud and rebuild their temple. Led in 538 BCE by Zerubbabel, 42,360 exiles returned to Yahud, with Jeshua the priest. According to the book of Ezra, Jeshua and Zerubbabel were frustrated in their efforts to rebuild the temple by the enmity and jealousy of the people of the land, especially the governor beyond the Nile River. However, in the second year of Darius, which was 520 BCE, Darius discovered the decree of Cyrus in the archives, and then directed the governor to support the work, which he did. And the temple was then completed in the 6th year of Darius, or around 516 BCE. What Zerubbabel completed in 516 was at best a modest temple. King Herod rebuilt it to make it much more magnificent, and the Roman army destroyed the second temple after the Jewish rebellion in 70 AD. A legend claims something magical was found by the Knights Templars within these grounds when they were occupied by the Templars from 1152 to 1291. While Herod's temple stood, Christ had come to the earth to inhabit the body of Jesus of Nazareth. When the mystery of Golgotha had taken place, the great secret that was intended to be mirrored in every single human soul was this, quote, "My kingdom is not of this world. End quote. It was then that the external physical temple of Solomon lost its significance, and its destiny of destruction was tragically fulfilled. That then is one aspect of the relation of Christ to Jesus. In those days, the Christ being could have been understood through the gnosis, but according to the world plan, that was not to be, although briefly the gnosis teemed with wisdom concerning the Christ. And it may truly be said that the path now taken by Christianity through the countries of the South, that is, through Greece, Italy, Spain, and so on, led more and more to the obliteration of insight into the essential nature of Christ. And Rome, sinking into decline, was destined to bring about the final extinction of understanding. A suitable body had to be prepared for Christ. What does this have to do with the birth of Christ? In order for Christ to be incarnated for all of humanity, there needed to be a resolution of Cain's fratricide of Abel. There had to be two births representing both Cain and Abel. Then these two would need to be joined somehow into one. This resolution was found, and that was to be Jesus of Nazareth. Into this temple, this body, then the Christ could enter at the baptism. Therein he remained for 3 years. And John the Baptist was the witness. By entering a human body, Christ had entered what must have been a wilderness for him. Today, we can ask, who is the John the Baptist for Christ's second coming, his appearance in the etheric? Might this be expressed in the words, I baptize with water, but he will baptize with fire? In speaking about the raising of Lazarus, Rudolf Steiner said that the Word, the Spirit, did not live in him before. Now, after this event, this Spirit lived in him. This Spirit had been born in him. Whoever becomes spiritual has caused the divine to rise from the tomb of his body. Into Lazarus, the eternal Word had entered. In the language of the mysteries, he became an initiate. Lazarus was the pupil of Jesus. Lazarus became an initiate through Christ Jesus himself. He was at the same time both the first Christian initiate and the first to be initiated by Christ Jesus himself. Our human mind is entombed in our mortal body. Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead was laid. In the words, Lazarus, come forth, we can recognize the call by which the Egyptian priest initiates summoned back to everyday life those who had subjected themselves to the process of initiation. During those 3.5 days, Lazarus met the beheaded John in the spiritual world, and John was his guide. After initiation, one takes on a new name. Lazarus chose John. When Constantine took power, not yet as a Christian, but under the sign of the cross, his mother, Helena, who was raised a Christian, pleaded to be allowed to go to Jerusalem to look for Christ's tomb, and she was so allowed. With the help of Bishop of Caesarea Eusebius and Bishop of Jerusalem Macarius, 3 crosses were found near a tomb, one which allegedly cured people of death. They presumed it to be the true cross upon which Christ Jesus had been crucified, and recall the story now of Balkis. Thus, these 4th century Romans believed that they had found Calvary. Constantine then ordered in 326 that Hadrian's temple to Jupiter, built in 135 AD, be replaced by a Christian church. A rock-cut tomb was found within that St. Helena and Macarius identified as the burial site of Jesus. A shrine was built enclosing the rock tomb within its own walls. Eventually, this shrine became a church with 2 domes, one large, one small. Over the next 1,500 years, churches were built here only to be destroyed later. Renovations here have been going on since 1959. These dual domes were refurbished in 1997, but they go back to 630 AD. Note that these dual domes have no overlap nor any meeting point. Largely because of St. Helena's discoveries, Constantine then sought in 330 AD to move the capital of his empire closer to the Holy Lands. Beginning in the 4th and extending through the 6th century, the Gnostics and the Manichaeans were destroyed. Fire was used to burn their books, relics, and temples. In 869, the church decreed that the human is body with a single focused soul. Soul with a spiritual focus was outlawed. Thereby, spirit was indirectly outlawed as well. In 1054, the Great Schism occurred when the Pope of Rome and the Patriarch of Constantinople excommunicated each other. From 1096 to 1099, the First Crusade happened in the Holy Lands. Jerusalem and the coastal areas came under European control. In 1108, Hugues de Payens joined Count Hugh of Champagne in a visit to Jerusalem. Hugues remains there after the Count returns to France. 10 years later, Hugues de Payens had organized the original 9 monk knights. These were destined to become perhaps the world's greatest warriors, the Knights Templars. For the next 86 years, they would be victorious in every battle. King Baldwin of Jerusalem had granted them a location on Mount Moriah, where they had access to King Solomon's temple, as well as the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Hence, the origin of their name, the Templar Knights, in merging monk with warrior, priest with king. In 1128, and I guess one could say Abel with Cain. In 1128, Hugues visited England and Scotland, where he raises men and money for the order. There he founded a Templar house in London and another near Edinburgh. By 1135, many cities in Europe sought to have one of these new architecture cathedrals built. Who funded these? In 1136, Grand Master Hugues died in Palestine. He had established its foundations. But in 1204, Constantinople is sacked by the new generation of crusaders. Why? The Doge of Venice, inspired by Ahriman, concocted an idea to raise money for this next crusade to recapture lost areas of the Holy Lands. Sadly, some Templars participated. The Crusaders were to steal holy relics from its cathedrals to sell to churches throughout Western Europe. The sacred altar at Hagia Sophia, formed of all kinds of precious materials and admired by the whole world, was smashed into bits, and the bits distributed among the soldiers, as were all the other sacred wealth of infinite splendor. Likely this is how the Shroud of Turin came into Templars' hands, as it belonged to the widow of Templar Geoffrey of Charny when she displayed it in 1357. Walland de Sarton, a minor cleric, participated in the Crusader capture of Constantinople. He returned with the head of John the Baptist that now resides within this cathedral. Notre Dame of Amiens. Walland de Sarton witnessed the defilement of holy objects in the most sacred of places within the church of Hagia Sophia. Built by the Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, it was in its day the largest and most elaborate building on earth. So great was the hall that, in the words of the imperial secretary, Nikitas Chonites, the marauding crusaders brought into the very sanctuary of the temple itself mules and asses with pack saddles. And some of these mules and asses, unable to keep their feet on the smoothly polished marble floors, slipped and were pierced by knives, so that excrement from their bowels and blood spilled and defiled the sacred floor. All who were there remarked upon the extraordinary quantity of church possessions that were looted during this sack of 1204. 5 years after the First Crusade, Pope Innocent III ordered a crusade against the Cathars of southern France. They were deemed to be heretics because their form of Christianity seemed similar to monotheism. The Pope's crusade was especially brutal. Cathars were pacifists. They had no soldiers. In Minerva in 1208, and again in Montsegur in 1244, hundreds were burned at the stake. The Inquisition continued such burnings into the 17th century, with Giordano Bruno in 1600 being the most notable. In 1303, King Philip murdered 2 popes, moved the Vatican to France, and made his boyhood friend the new pope, Pope Clement. In 1313, King Philip had been saved from death by a mob, by the Templars. But King Philip believed he witnessed a stockpile of gold in this Templar temple. Out of greed and envy, Philip got Clement to condemn the Templars. In 1314, 54 Templars were burned, including Jacques de Molay, their Grand Master. King Philip and Pope Clement, by de Molay's prophecy, would both be dead within a year. From 1314 to 17, the Great Famine sweeps across Western Europe. The suffering continued from 1347 to 51. with the Black Plague that devastated the population of most of Europe. Just before the start of the Black Plague, that is from 1337 to 1453, the 100-Year War had broken out to bring even more misery. Finally came to an end when Joan of Arc inspired the French. So you think we live in difficult times? All during these years of misery, construction of Gothic cathedrals continued. The Gothic cathedral, with its dual spires, is an architecture generally attributed to the Templars. It speaks to the hearts and minds of the faithful. When we enter, when we feel the inner space, it tells us in its forms that it is there to receive the community, the thoughts and aspirations of the congregation. The Gothic arch seems to lead out and beyond. Everywhere from inside, one feels a kind of urge, a desire to break through the enclosing walls and mingle with the universe. With its multicolored windows, it provides a mysterious yet natural link between this interior space and the all-pervading sunlight weaving through its colored windows. Like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the first Goetheanum was also dual-domed, but here the domes slightly interpenetrate. Was this an expression of the evolution of consciousness? The building was to be an outer garment for anthroposophy, which came wholly from the spirit of anthroposophy, but was there for physical eyes to see. The whole building was created in its architecture, in its sculpture, in its paintings, and everything connected with it in such a way that what was livingly grasped in spirit vision expressed itself, not in intellectual symbolic forms, but living ideas, mobile thoughts about the spiritual world come to artistic expression in such a way as to be directly felt and seen. One might claim that the first Goetheanum, like Solomon's temple, was full of symbols. But Steiner was emphatic that there were no symbols in the whole building. And if anyone maintains that the building had a symbolic meaning, he speaks as one who knows nothing about anthroposophy. It was to be a house of the word, just as the throat with the larynx separates the head from the trunk. So did the podium stand where the word could be spoken. When a pupil for initiation entered the temple of Ephesus, his attention was directed to the statue of the god. The statue called to him in the language of the heart with these words: "Unite yourself with the cosmic ether, and you will behold the earthly from out of the ether heights." Had this Goetheanum been brought to completion, then as one entered from the west, one's glance would have fallen upon the statue that bade man know yourself in your cosmic nature. Know yourself as a being set between the powers of Lucifer and Ahriman, where in your midst a God-maintained inner balance of being exists. This temple for Artemis in Ephesus was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. This, like many a beautiful temple, was destroyed by fire. Why fire? The 4 elements are in each of us. Earth for the physical, water etheric, air astral, fire ego. One's will is active in this fire element, and fire returns the elements to the state of old Saturn, that is, to their beginning. On the day when the goddess Artemis was busy attending the birth of Alexander, Herostratus, seeking fame, torched her temple in Ephesus. Let me quote Steiner on this. With the temple burning at Ephesus, it was made manifest that further spiritual evolution was only possible if men became conscious that there are gods, for example, Lucifer and Ahriman, that are supersensible beings, but who are jealous of the further advance of man. The burning at Ephesus marks the beginning of the epic that saw the gradual and complete disappearance of the mysteries in their ancient form. In a manner not at all unlike that which befell Ephesus in earlier time, exactly at the moment in its evolution when the Goetheanum was ready to become the bearer of the renewal of spiritual life. In that very moment was flung into it the burning brand, arson, but this time by the jealousy of men. The first Goetheanum was a living being, so wrote Madeline von Deventer. The day after the fire, Rudolf Steiner said to Count Pulsar Holditz, "The differentiation of souls is great. Indeed, they all want to see and hear everything, to be present at everything, but they don't want to wake up. So they must wake up with catastrophic and personal pain. Here it is not karma ruling, but a not being awake of the members. And it is the jealousy of people working all the way into the physical. The possibility was to have a house of the word, but the house of the word can only exist if it finds its corresponding living reflection in the heart, the world conscience. That means the human being doesn't just listen, but is also willing and able to be responsible as a human being to the word of this world. That was the meaning of the building. Word and response, logos and human being. After the burning, Rudolf Steiner offered these words to the gathered members. To change the pain and grief into the impulse for action, we dedicate ourselves in solemn vow to the highest divine forces that are within us. A spiritual flame lights up in our hearts. Yea, the flame in our hearts shall shed new light and warmth on all that was purposed and willed in this Goetheanum, on all that we are now resolved to carry forward on the advancing wave of human evolution. We will remain faithful to the spirit in which at a certain moment of our life we first sought spiritual science of the Goetheanum. In the whole cosmos, something is happening which summons men to adopt a spirituality different from what existed previously. Now, the forces of the cosmos, not only earthly impulses, demand something from men. A kind of revolution is taking place in the cosmos, the result of which must be the striving for a new spirituality. What we ourselves have to create must be essentially new, in the sense that we must work with forces differing altogether from those in operation in bygone times. We have to create out of the free activity of our own human souls, The hallmark of our age is consciousness. It is the age of the consciousness soul. We must create out of full and clear consciousness, free from any influence arising from the subconscious life. That is why we must open our minds and hearts to thoughts which shed light upon the task of building. Only if we know upon what laws and fundamental spiritual impulses our work must be grounded, only if what we do is in line and harmony with the evolutionary forces operating in mankind as a whole, only then will achievement be within our reach. What we have to create must, in its very essence, be new. This must be spoken to the stars. Now, I'd like to give you some of my own conclusions. These are based on my reasoning, not my spiritual research. As Robert McDermott wrote in his introduction to Steiner's lectures in According to Luke, quote, assuming Steiner was able to do what he claimed, render a deeper hidden description of what Luke actually saw, how was he able to do this? This slide could be a whole lecture in itself. Here I ask the question, when did Lazarus reincarnate and as whom? We have many clues. I've discussed some during this talk. Another key is found in John chapter 21 when Christ is speaking to Peter. Peter is the rock upon which Christ was to build his church in the physical realm. Rock, physical. Follow me. But all knew that John was the beloved disciple. So Peter points to John and asks, what about him? To this Christ answers, what is it to you that I have him wait until I come again? I need you now to build my church. Will you do this? In addition to an evolution of consciousness, we also have an evolution of love. Peter represents that state at that time. That state, we could use the word philos, as a lover of Sophia, a philosopher. Of all the disciples, only John could be there upon Golgotha. John represents the next stage in evolution of love, namely agape. With the second coming, humanity is able to develop agape love. It is the time for John the Evangelist to appear now. Recall that Hiram was promised a lineage, but Hiram was killed. So what was Balkis? Lazarus was Hiram Abiff, who, being of the lineage of Cain, was tasked with bringing together the Cain and Abel soul gestures, as well as the Aristotelians and the Platonists. Who could do the work of Christ to unite the streams of the sons of Cain and the stream of Abel Seth? But where is Hiram's promised lineage? Is Hiram's lineage even physical? Could there be an etheric lineage? Are we seeing here a glimpse of what is to come in the 6th and 7th post-Atlantean cultural ages? In Steiner's last address, he referred to the topic of how Lazarus had chosen the name John because during his initiation, he and John the Baptist had worked together. Lazarus of the Cain lineage and John the Baptist representing the Abel lineage. In the future incarnation of John the Baptist as Raphael and then Novalis, Lazarus is there fructifying the soul of these individualities. Just as Zarathustra had given his preserved astral body to Hermes and his preserved etheric body to Moses, something similar is occurring here. Does Rudolf Steiner fit into this somehow? Who was he who knew so intimately the fifth gospel? Who could proclaim the appearance of Christ in the etheric as John had proclaimed Christ in the physical? Who could say, let us here and now lay in the ground of our hearts the dodecahedron foundation stone of love? Did Rudolf Steiner express agape love to those with whom he worked? Was Rudolf Steiner expressing himself as Hiram in the building of the first Goetheanum, and then as John with a post-fire Goetheanum? Do we see this in the transition from the foundation stone to the foundation stone meditation? My speculative conclusion: these were all the same individuality that was Rudolf Steiner. He was Lazarus and he was Hiram Abiff, who must bring together Cain and Abel soul gestures, the Aristotelians and the Platonists as well. Only he could know so intimately the fifth gospel. He who could proclaim the appearance of Christ in the etheric as John had proclaimed Christ in the physical. He who could say, let us here and now lay in the ground of our hearts the dodecahedron foundation stone of love, an expression of agape love. The fire trumpet of John has sounded. Rudolf Steiner was expressing himself not only as Hiram with the first Goetheanum, but also as John with his post-fire Goetheanum, and how he expressed the foundation stone and the foundation stone meditation. I close with these words from Rudolf Steiner. The Christianity of the future, which possesses the secret of the molten sea and the golden triangle, exists secretly. The water of calm wisdom is united with the fire of the astral world, with the fire of passion and desire to be renewed, to be the renewal of the fire mist of ancient times. A union must be brought about, which is of bronze, that is to say, is lasting and durable. It must endure into the sixth cultural age, when the secret of the sacred golden triangle is added to it, the secret of Manas, Buddhi, and Atman. This triangle, with all that it entails, will form the content of the renewed Christianity of the sixth cultural age. Thank you.